Now this right here is the Minisforum EM680. And to be quite frank with you, this thing is kind of ridiculous. And just for a little perspective, this is my ergonomic mouse, and this is the mini PC that we're talking about. I mean, here's the LTT banana for scale if you want a better comparison here. We can see this is the website coming in right now about $419. If we look at the spec sheet here, you can see the size, it's about 80 by 80 by 43 millimeters. Now, this thing, despite its size, is no slouch. You would think something this small would have something like a Intel Celeron, or even maybe some little ARM CPU in it. No, it does not. It has a AMD Ryzen 7 6800U 8-core 16 threads up to 4.7 GHz with AMD Radeon 680M graphics. And if we go up here, we can see that the model I have is the 16 gigabytes of RAM, 512GB SSD, and this is LPDDR5 dual channel onboard memory. It's not upgradable, there's simply just not enough room in this thing to have it as actual expandable memory, but it does come with a M.2 2230 PCIe 4.0, does support up to 4 terabytes. I'll be quite frank, I'm not going to open it up today, but you can see here if you just unscrew the bottom, unfortunately, and I do hate it when these companies do this, the screws for this are under these feet pads that you have to peel, makes the adhesive not as good, whatever. Remove this and you can upgrade that SSD if you would like to. Now, of course, with how ridiculously small this is, we're going to need to talk about some of the I/O and what you actually get on this thing. First of all, on the front here, there's not too much going on. We have a single USB-C, this is USB 4, we have our auxiliary and our power button. Flipping it over here, we have our Kingston lock, we have a spot for a is it micro? I think micro SD card. All the standard USB-A's here are going to be USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. We have a little reset button. Over here we have an HDMI. That is a HDMI 2.1 supporting up to 4K at 144 Hertz. Two more of those same USB-A's, an additional USB 4. And then on this side, nothing much other than some ventilation. Now, unfortunately, it is missing an Ethernet. No Ethernet on here, so it's going to be a little more difficult to make this a little compact server, which honestly would be a fantastic use case for this. Granted, you could use a dongle or a dock or something like that to add that functionality and additional ports with that USB 4. It can support video out and a whole bunch of things. So technically, you could use this as a one-port operation. Plug a dock into this, and you don't have to use any of the other ports because it can supply power, video out, and so forth. As a matter of fact, when you get the box here, you really don't get too much in here. You get your USB-C cable, a USB-C adapter pulling 65 watts, you get an HDMI cable, and of course your user manuals. Now you may be asking, how does this thing actually perform? And I can tell you, it performs almost as good as our sponsor. Akamai Connected Cloud, use them to spin up a Linode. You can run a wide variety of Linux servers or use their one-click marketplace to set up a bunch of different applications. I personally use them for a lot of the backend services on my website, specifically Plausible, which is a wonderful analytics tool, and I do have a video on the Akamai channel if you are interested in kind of setting that up and self-hosting it for yourself. And with all that, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, if you do want to test it out, you can use the link down below for a $100 60-day credit for new users. With that, let's go ahead and dive into some first general benchmarking and general performance, and then we're going to see, can this little teeny tiny thing game? Now, this right here is the mini PC, and it is crazy how well it actually performed in a general Geekbench test. You can see this is my page. I've done a lot of different benchmarks using this tool, and you can see this is the EM680 here with the Ryzen 7 6800U. We got a single core score of just barely under 2,000 points and a multi-core score of 6,800. If we look right under it, this is the GTR 7 with the 7000 series Ryzen 7. So basically an entire year newer, and you can see it just barely scored under this, and this is a beefy boy. This is what I'm currently using as my primary computer that I'm even recording this video on right now. Now this right here is the i5 1340p. Intel generally does very good at these kind of benchmark tests. And if we go down here, we have another mini PC with the Ryzen 9 of the same kind of year, and this scored just barely better on single core score and slightly better on multi-core score. So really, when it comes to these Geekbench scores, this thing is definitely a contender and kind of holds its ground even with the small form factor. It's getting these scores that it should be getting, despite only pulling the 65 watts of power. Now to test it further, we ran Cinebench, and on the multi-core score, we can see it finishing up here. We got 10,963, which is an impressive score. If we look at down here at kind of the generic comparison table, it is scoring just under about 6,000 points under the Threadripper, and it is scoring better than the 9000 series i9 by about 2,000 points. So from there, I wanted to test the SSD that shipped with it, and we could see here we're getting about a 4500 read and a 3500 write speed. Not the fastest SSD in the world, but pretty good shipping with this thing for right around the $400 price point. And with those scores, of course, just general day-to-day use, web browsing, basic video editing, things like that, this thing is going to perform completely fine. You can use this as your main computer if you're not doing things that are like super crazy, like trying to do like 3D animation or things like that. Maybe some advanced like ArcGIS computing, that might kind of struggle. But for what 98% of people do on their computers, this little tiny thing is going to do you justice. And that's not including gaming. We're going to touch on that right now. And first, starting out, we have a Splitgate. One thing I will note is this is impressively cool. The fans are working pretty good. You could see the GPU temperature at about 64 degrees Celsius. And this is partially due to the kind of lower power draw at 13 watts for the CPU and GPU. It's using just about 10 gigabytes of RAM playing this game, and you can see we're getting frame rates in the upper 60s to lower 70s. This is at 1080p full quality. Now, if I pull up this video right here of the GTR7, which is a kind of similar mini PC that we took a look at, the Geekbench score, I've scored a little bit better. You can see that this is being able to pull a little bit more power, and because of that, we're getting much higher performance and frame rates in gaming. So the limited power consumption does have an impact on things like your frame rates and things like that. Moving on to another kind of lighter game, we have Fall Guys, and we can see here this is running at a solid 66, basically high 60s frames per second. It's using a little bit less RAM at 8,500 megabytes. The CPU, GPU temperatures are right around the same, and of course it is pulling those 13 watts, maybe up to 14 watts of power, and as you can see there on the CPU. Now, where it does kind of struggle is some of the more higher end AAA titles. I tried to get Elden Ring to work to the best of my ability. I was having issues just with the resolution. You can see there it's kind of in a weird pictured mode. The game crashed on me at one point. It was having some difficulties. After some time, I did finally get it to work, and it was running right about 20-ish, 30 frames per second. Playable, and this is on a lower quality settings at 1080p. Playable, but not that great of a gaming experience. So with all that, my final kind of thoughts on this is I am just absolutely impressed with what they're able to squeeze into this small of a form factor. The performance is absolutely amazing. This performs better than the desktop computer did that I built a couple of years ago with like a Ryzen, I think it was a 3700 CPU? Yeah, it was a Ryzen 3700X. This performs better than that, which is kind of crazy. And I had the dedicated, I think it was the 580 dedicated graphics card. Compared to getting that thing out and plugging it in, I'd much rather use this. Granted, that does have more memory. But if I were to purchase it, I would definitely recommend going with this one right here for an extra, what is that, 30 bucks? 30 bucks, you're going to want those 32 gigabytes of memory. It's soldered onto the thing, non-upgradable, so get the maximum amount of RAM that you can. SSDs, not as important. I mean, for an additional, what is that, like 40 bucks? See, I don't even know if that's really worth it. Just get the higher RAM. I wish they would have sent the higher RAM. With all that, anything I mentioned will be linked down below, and I do hope you have an absolutely beautiful day, and goodbye.